Hello, my name is Rebekah, and what I'm about to tell you will shake your faith in family bonds forever. Picture this. You're standing in a lawyer's office in downtown Phoenix, watching your older brother inherit everything. Your childhood home, your father's business, even the vintage Mustang you learned to drive in, while you get absolutely nothing. Not a single penny. Not even Dad's old baseball glove that he promised would be yours someday. Before we embark on this incredible journey together, I have a small, heartfelt favor to ask. Please subscribe to my channel. Give this video a thumbs up. It costs you nothing, but means the world to me. And let me know in the comments which beautiful corner of the world you're watching from. Your support truly makes all the difference. That was my reality 3 months ago. My brother Marcus walked out of that office smirking, keys to Dad's house jingling in his hand, while I sat there feeling like the ground had opened up beneath me. The will seemed legitimate. Dad's signature, proper witnesses, everything sealed and official. But something felt wrong, terribly wrong. You see, my father and I had been incredibly close. Every Sunday for 20 years, we'd sit on his back porch, drinking sweet tea, talking about life, dreams, and yes, his will. He'd always told me the house would be split between Marcus and me, with his cabinet-making business going to whoever showed the most interest. Since Marcus had been living in Seattle for 8 years building his tech career, while I stayed in Phoenix, helping Dad with his custom furniture orders, I thought I knew where I stood. But here's where it gets interesting and infuriating. The will that lawyer read aloud that day told a completely different story. According to those documents, Dad had apparently decided I was irresponsible with money, and that Marcus deserved everything because he was the more stable child. Words my father had never spoken about me in his entire life. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just hurt. It awakens something primal inside you. As I watched Marcus schedule appointments with real estate agents to sell our family home, I felt a fire ignite in my chest. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about justice, truth, and proving that sometimes the person you least expect can orchestrate the most devastating deception. What I discovered over the next 3 months would unravel not just a forged will, but a web of lies, manipulation, and greed that stretched back years. My brother thought he'd won the ultimate prize, but he'd made one crucial mistake. He underestimated me. The morning after the will reading, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every word, every phrase, trying to make sense of what had happened. By dawn, I was sitting in my small apartment kitchen, surrounded by scattered memories and mounting questions. Dad had died suddenly of a heart attack while I was visiting my college friend Emma in Tucson. The timing couldn't have been worse. Or perhaps for Marcus, it couldn't have been better. Marcus had flown in from Seattle within hours, taking charge of funeral arrangements with an efficiency that both impressed and unsettled me. "Don't worry about the details, Rebekah," he'd said, his arm around my shoulders at the funeral home. "I'll handle everything. You just focus on grieving." At the time, I'd been grateful for his strength. Now, I wondered if it had been calculation. I decided to start where everything began. Dad's house on Cactus Road. Marcus had given me a week to collect my personal belongings before he put it on the market. As I pulled into the familiar driveway, the desert sunrise painting the adobe walls golden, I felt a stab of loss so sharp it nearly took my breath away. The house felt different without Dad's presence, hollow and echoing. But as I walked through rooms filled with 30 years of memories, something else caught my attention. Marcus was already there, going through Dad's filing cabinets with systematic precision. "Morning, Becca," he said without looking up, using the childhood nickname that now sounded condescending. "I'm just organizing Dad's financial records. The accountant needs everything in order." "Need help?" I offered, moving closer to see what he was doing. No, I've got it handled." He closed the drawer quickly. "Why don't you focus on your stuff? I saw some boxes in the garage you can use." It was then I noticed something odd. The filing system Dad had maintained religiously for decades, color-coded tabs, chronological order, everything labeled in his careful handwriting, was completely disorganized. Papers were scattered, files mixed up, as if someone had been searching frantically for something specific. "Marcus, why are Dad's files such a mess?" He straightened up, running a hand through his hair. "You know how Dad was near the end. His memory wasn't what it used to be, probably forgot where he put things." That was the first lie I caught him in. Dad's mind had been sharp as a tack right up until he died. He could still recite customer orders from memory and balance his books without a calculator. His filing system had been his pride and joy, second only to his workshop. I spent the day collecting photo albums, my grandmother's jewelry, and some of Dad's handmade furniture pieces Marcus didn't want. But I also spent it observing. Marcus made several phone calls, always stepping outside when he noticed me nearby. He kept checking his watch, as if waiting for something. And when I found Dad's appointment calendar still hanging by the kitchen phone, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The week before Dad died, there was an appointment marked in red ink. Attorney appointment, Johnson & Associates, 10 a.m. Tuesday. But when I asked Marcus about it, he claimed he didn't know anything about it. "Maybe it was just a routine thing," he'd shrugged. "You know, Dad, always worrying about paperwork." But Dad never used red ink for routine appointments. Red ink meant important, urgent, not to be missed. And Johnson & Associates wasn't the law firm that had read us the will. That had been Peterson, Cole, and Brennan downtown. As I drove home that evening, my mind was spinning. Marcus had been in Phoenix for longer than he'd initially claimed. I'd found a coffee shop receipt in Dad's trash from 4 days before Dad's death, with Marcus's credit card signature. Why had he lied about when he arrived? And why hadn't he mentioned the attorney appointment? That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to accept this quietly. I was going to find out what really happened, starting with that mysterious attorney appointment and the real reason my brother had returned to Phoenix. Something told me that Marcus's perfect son act was hiding secrets that went much deeper than I'd imagined. The next morning, I called Johnson & Associates. After being transferred 3 times, I finally reached someone who could help me, a paralegal named Janet, who'd worked there for 15 years. "Yes, I remember your father," she said when I explained who I was. "Such a gentle man. He came in very concerned about updating his will. Said he'd discovered some disturbing information about family finances and wanted to make sure his wishes were crystal clear." My heart started pounding. "Did he actually update his will with your firm?" "Oh yes, absolutely. We prepared new documents for him. He was very specific about his instructions. Said he wanted everything split equally between his 2 children, with some special provisions about the family business going to whichever child had shown the most dedication to it over the years." I nearly dropped the phone. "Are you certain?" Because the will that was read at Peterson, Cole, and Brennan said something completely different. There was a long pause. "I'm sorry, dear, but that doesn't sound right. Your father was very clear that he wanted fairness above all else. He even brought in some financial records that had upset him greatly, something about unauthorized transactions he'd discovered." After hanging up, I sat in my car outside the law office, hands shaking. There were 2 wills, 2 completely different documents. And Marcus had somehow made sure the wrong one was read. I drove straight to Peterson, Cole, and Brennan and requested a meeting with the attorney who'd handled the reading, Richard Brennan. He was a thin man with nervous energy, constantly adjusting his glasses. "I'd like to see the original will document," I said, after explaining my concerns. "Of course, though I should mention the will was brought to us by your brother. Said he'd found it among your father's papers after the funeral." My skin crawled. "Marcus brought you the will?" "Yes, along with all the proper documentation. Death certificate, identification, everything in order. He was very thorough." When Brennan brought out the file, I studied the will carefully. Dad's signature looked right, but something about the paper itself bothered me. It seemed too clean, too fresh for a document that was supposedly created months earlier. "Mr. Brennan, do you remember what condition this will was in when Marcus brought it to you?" He frowned, thinking. You know, now that you mention it, it was in remarkably good condition. Not a crease or stain on it, which was unusual for something that had been stored in a home filing system. I left the law office with copies of everything and a growing certainty that I was dealing with something far more sophisticated than I'd initially thought. This wasn't just about inheritance. This was about fraud on a massive scale. That evening, I called my friend Emma, who worked as a forensic accountant in Tucson. I needed help understanding the financial angle. "Becca, you're describing classic will fraud," she said after I explained everything. "But proving it is going to be incredibly difficult. You need to find the real will, and you need to establish a timeline of when everything happened. Where do I even start?" Follow the money. If Marcus was manipulating your father's finances before his death, there will be evidence. Bank records, credit card statements, anything that shows unusual activity in the weeks before your dad died. The next day I went back to Dad's house. Marcus was there again, this time with a real estate agent taking photos. The for sale sign was already planted in the front yard. "Moving fast," I commented, trying to keep my voice neutral. "No point in dragging it out," Marcus replied. "The market's hot right now. I want to close on this quickly and get back to my life in Seattle." While they discussed staging and pricing, I slipped into Dad's bedroom. His old desktop computer was still there, covered with a sheet. Marcus had apparently overlooked it, probably assuming Dad didn't keep important records digitally. But I knew better. Dad had started using online banking a few years ago, and he was meticulous about downloading statements. I quickly powered up the computer and started searching through his files. What I found made my stomach turn. In the 3 months before Dad's death, there had been several large transactions I'd never seen before. Money transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, credit card charges for expensive items Dad would never have bought. But the most damaging evidence was in his email. There was a sent message dated just 2 days before his death, addressed to Johnson & Associates. "Please proceed with the new will as discussed. I want this finalized immediately. I've discovered my son Marcus has been accessing my accounts without permission, and I need to protect my assets and ensure Rebekah receives her fair share." The reply from the attorney was even more revealing. "Mr. Patterson, your new will is ready for signing. Given your concerns about potential financial exploitation, we've also prepared a letter to be delivered to law enforcement if anything happens to you before this matter is resolved." I printed everything quickly, my hands shaking. Not only had Dad known about Marcus's theft, but he'd also taken legal steps to protect both of us. The question now was, what had happened to the real will, and where was that letter to law enforcement? As I heard footsteps approaching the bedroom, I quickly shut down the computer and pretended to be looking through Dad's dresser. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Finding what you need?" he asked. "Just some of Dad's personal things," I replied, slipping the printed emails into my purse. "Almost done here." But I was far from done. I now had evidence of theft, proof that Dad had created a second will, and documentation of his fears about Marcus. What I needed next was to find that real will and the letter Dad had prepared for law enforcement. Something told me both documents were closer than I thought. Armed with the evidence from Dad's computer, I knew I needed professional help. That's when I remembered Detective Sarah Martinez, who'd handled a break-in at Dad's workshop 2 years earlier. She'd been thorough, professional, and had actually caught the kids who'd done it. If anyone could help me navigate this legally, it would be her. "Document fraud is serious business," Detective Martinez said when I met her at a coffee shop in Scottsdale. She'd reviewed everything I'd brought, the emails, the 2 different wills, the timeline of events. "But I have to warn you, family inheritance disputes are complicated. We need ironclad evidence that a crime was committed." "What about the financial theft? Dad's emails prove Marcus was accessing his accounts." "That's a start, but we need to establish a pattern. Can you get his bank records for the past 6 months?" I'd been thinking about that problem all morning. Dad made me a co-signer on his checking account last year when he had that minor surgery. Said he wanted someone he trusted to handle bills if something happened to him. I should still have access. Martinez nodded approvingly. "That's perfect, but be careful. If Marcus catches on to what you're doing, he might try to cover his tracks even more." That afternoon, I went to Dad's bank, Desert Community Credit Union. The manager, Carol Henderson, had known our family for 20 years. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Rebekah," she said, leading me to her office. "Your father was such a good man, always had a kind word for everyone." "Carol, I need to look at Dad's account activity for the past 6 months. I think there might have been some unauthorized transactions." Her expression grew serious. "Actually, I was wondering if someone from the family would come in about this. I noticed some unusual activity in the weeks before your father passed away. Large cash withdrawals, transfers to accounts we didn't recognize. I almost called him about it, but—" She shrugged sadly. The bank records told a devastating story. Starting 3 months before Dad's death, there had been systematic theft. Small amounts at first, $200 here, $500 there, but escalating quickly. In the final 2 weeks of Dad's life, Marcus had transferred nearly $15,000 to what appeared to be his own account. "Carol, did Dad ever mention this to you?" "Actually, yes. He came in about a week before he died, very upset. Said he'd discovered someone had been accessing his accounts, and he wanted to change all his passwords and security codes. He also asked about setting up a trust to protect his assets." "Did he follow through with that?" "He made an appointment with our estate planning specialist for the day after he died." Carol's voice dropped to a whisper. "I always wondered if the stress of discovering the theft might have contributed to his heart attack." I felt a chill run down my spine. Had Dad died because of the shock of discovering Marcus's betrayal? It was speculation, but the timeline was troubling. That evening, I called Emma again to help me understand the financial picture. "Becca, this is textbook elder financial abuse," she said after I read her the bank records. "Marcus was clearly stealing from your dad for months. The question is, what was he doing with the money?" "What do you mean?" $15,000 doesn't just disappear. He was spending it on something specific. Credit card debt, gambling, investment losses, something that required quick cash. I thought about that as I tried to fall asleep. What financial pressure could have driven Marcus to steal from his own father? His tech job in Seattle paid well, and he'd always seemed financially stable. But people hide things, especially when it comes to money troubles. The next morning, I decided to do some digital detective work of my own. Marcus had always been active on social media, and I wondered if his posts might give me clues about his financial situation. What I found was illuminating. 6 months ago, Marcus had been posting about expensive trips, designer clothes, and his new luxury apartment in Seattle. But then, about 4 months ago, the posts stopped abruptly. No more photos of expensive dinners or weekend getaways. Instead, there were vague posts about new business ventures and investment opportunities. I screenshot everything and started digging deeper. A reverse image search on one of his business venture photos led me to a website for a cryptocurrency trading company that had been shut down by the SEC for fraud. Another post mentioned a ground floor opportunity in a startup that, according to news articles, had collapsed spectacularly, taking millions of investor dollars with it. The picture was becoming clearer. Marcus hadn't just been stealing from Dad because he was greedy. He'd been stealing because he was desperate. He'd lost money in bad investments and was trying to cover his losses before anyone found out. But there was still the matter of the forged will. Creating a convincing fake will required specific knowledge and resources. Marcus was smart, but was he smart enough to pull off sophisticated document fraud? I called Detective Martinez with my findings. "This changes things," she said. "Financial desperation is a powerful motive for fraud, but we still need to prove he actually created the fake will. That's going to require forensic document analysis." "How do we get that done?" "I have a contact at the state crime lab who owes me a favor. If we can get both will documents, she can analyze the paper, ink, and printing to determine if they're authentic." The problem was getting access to both wills. Johnson and Associates had the real one, but Peterson, Cole, and Brennan had the fake one, and I wasn't sure they'd just hand it over for testing. That's when I remembered something Janet, the paralegal, had mentioned. Dad had been very specific about having copies of important documents. If he'd had Johnson and Associates prepare a new will, he might have kept a copy at home. I needed to search Dad's house more thoroughly, but with Marcus there constantly, it would be nearly impossible, unless I could find a way to get him out of town. The solution came to me as I was looking at his social media posts again. One of his friends in Seattle had commented about a tech conference happening the following week. If I could convince Marcus that there was some urgent business matter requiring his attention in Seattle, I might have the house to myself for a few days. Time to see just how good an actress I could be. Getting Marcus out of town required careful planning. I couldn't be too obvious, or he'd become suspicious. But I also couldn't be too subtle, or he might not take the bait. The key was making it seem like his idea. I started by calling him with what sounded like family business concerns. "Marcus, I've been thinking about Dad's workshop equipment. Some of those industrial tools are worth serious money. Maybe we should get them appraised before you sell the house." "I hadn't really thought about that," he admitted. "You think they're worth enough to matter?" Dad always said his cabinet saw alone was worth $8,000. And there's all that vintage woodworking equipment he collected over the years. We might be looking at $20,000 or $30,000 total. I could practically hear the dollar signs clicking in his head. Marcus's financial desperation made him easy to manipulate. "You know what?" he said. "That's actually smart thinking, Becca. Maybe I should look into getting everything professionally appraised." The thing is, I heard about this specialized appraiser in Seattle who deals specifically with craftsman tools and vintage equipment. Apparently, he's the go-to guy for estate sales involving workshop equipment. It was a complete lie, but Marcus didn't know that. "Seattle, huh?" He sounded interested. "That would be convenient. I need to handle some business matters up there anyway. My company's been trying to reach me about a project timeline." Perfect. I was feeding his existing need to return to Seattle while giving him a cover story that justified the trip. "I could get his contact information if you want, but from what I heard, he's pretty busy. You'd probably need to book several days with him to get everything properly evaluated." "Yeah, that makes sense. You know what? Let me look into flying up there next week. I can handle the appraiser and deal with my work situation at the same time." 3 days later, Marcus was on a plane to Seattle, planning to be gone for a full week. I waited until I was sure he'd landed before driving to Dad's house with a plan. I'd spent hours thinking about where Dad would have hidden important documents. He was methodical, but also cautious. If he'd suspected Marcus of theft, he would have put the real will somewhere safe, but accessible to me. I started in his bedroom, going through every drawer, every book, every possible hiding place. Nothing. Then I moved to his study, checking behind picture frames, inside book covers, even taping along the undersides of drawers for hidden compartments. It was in the workshop where I finally found what I was looking for. Dad had an old toolbox that had belonged to his father, my grandfather. It was more sentimental than functional, filled with vintage hand tools that Dad never actually used but couldn't bear to throw away. Hidden beneath the bottom tray, wrapped in plastic and tape, was a manila envelope marked "Important Documents, for Rebekah only." My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside were 2 documents that changed everything. The first was a copy of the real will from Johnson and Associates. Just as Janet had described, it split everything equally between Marcus and me, with the business going to whichever child had shown the most dedication. But there was more. Dad had included a detailed letter explaining his reasoning, including his discovery of Marcus's theft and his concerns about my brother's financial stability. The second document was even more damaging to Marcus. It was a formal complaint Dad had prepared for the police, documenting every unauthorized transaction he'd discovered, complete with bank records and a timeline of the theft. At the bottom, in Dad's careful handwriting, was a note. "If anything happens to me before this matter is resolved, please ensure this reaches law enforcement immediately." But what made my blood run cold was a third item I hadn't expected. A small digital recorder with a note attached. "Conversation with Marcus. Evidence of admission." With trembling fingers, I pressed play. Dad's voice filled the workshop. "Marcus, I know what you've been doing. I have all the bank records." Then Marcus, sounding defensive and angry, "Dad, I can explain. I was going to pay it back. I just had some temporary cash flow problems." $15,000, Marcus. You stole $15,000 from me. It's not stealing if I'm your son. This money is going to be mine anyway when you die. The casual cruelty of that statement hit me like a physical blow. Dad's voice, sadder now. "Is that really how you see this? You're so focused on my death that you can't wait for it?" "Look, old man, I needed that money more than you did. You just let it sit in the bank doing nothing. I was investing it, trying to build something for my future." "By lying to me? By accessing my accounts without permission?" Marcus's voice grew harder, more threatening. "What are you going to do about it? Call the cops on your own son? You wouldn't dare. It would destroy this family." "This family is already destroyed, Marcus. You've made sure of that." The recording ended there, but it was enough. Marcus had essentially confessed to the theft and, even worse, had shown a callous disregard for Dad's well-being. I sat in the workshop, surrounded by the tools and memories of my father's life, feeling a mixture of grief and rage unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Marcus hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen Dad's peace of mind in his final days. He'd turned what should have been a loving father-son relationship into a source of stress and heartbreak. But now I had everything I needed: the real will, evidence of theft, and Marcus's own recorded admission. The question was how to use it most effectively. I called Detective Martinez immediately. "Rebekah, this is exactly what we needed," she said, after I described what I'd found. "The recording alone is enough to file criminal charges for theft. Combined with the forged will, we're looking at multiple felonies." "What's our next step?" "Bring everything to the station tomorrow morning. I'll start the paperwork for an arrest warrant, but I want to coordinate with the prosecutor's office to make sure we handle this properly. Marcus has no idea you found this evidence, right? He thinks I'm just the grieving sister who accepted her fate. Good. Keep it that way until we're ready to move. And Rebekah, your father would be proud of what you're doing. This is about justice, not just revenge." As I carefully rewrapped the documents and prepared to leave, I felt Dad's presence in the workshop more strongly than ever. The tools he'd used to create beautiful furniture, the workbench where he'd taught me to sand and stain wood, the smell of cedar shavings that still lingered in the air. It all reminded me that this wasn't just about money or property. This was about honoring the memory of a good man who'd been betrayed by his own son. Marcus thought he'd won, but the game was far from over. Detective Martinez moved faster than I'd expected. By Thursday morning, she had arrest warrants prepared and a forensic analysis of both will documents in progress. The crime lab had confirmed what we suspected. The will Peterson, Cole, and Brennan had was printed on different paper stock and used different ink than the original documents from Johnson and Associates. "We have him cold on the theft charges," Martinez told me as we sat in her office. "The recording is devastating evidence, but I want to wait until he returns from Seattle to arrest him. It'll be cleaner if we don't have to deal with extradition issues. He's supposed to be back tomorrow afternoon." "Perfect. I'll have units ready to pick him up at his hotel. But Rebekah, there's something else we need to discuss. Your father's recorded conversation suggests Marcus was getting desperate. Desperate people sometimes do dangerous things." A chill ran down my spine. "You think he might have... that Dad's heart attack wasn't natural?" "I'm not saying that, but I am saying we should look into it. The medical examiner ruled it a natural death, but given what we now know about the timeline and Marcus's financial desperation, it's worth another look." The idea that Marcus might have actually contributed to Dad's death was almost too horrific to consider. But the pieces fit together in a terrifying way: the theft, the fake will, the timing of everything. That evening, Marcus called me from Seattle. He sounded pleased with himself. "The equipment appraisal went even better than expected," he said. "Turns out some of Dad's tools are worth a fortune to collectors. We're looking at close to $40,000 for the workshop contents alone." Another lie. I'd confirmed there was no appraiser in Seattle. Marcus had spent the week trying to manage his financial problems and probably celebrating what he thought was his successful fraud. "That's great news," I managed to say, playing along. "When are you coming back?" "Tomorrow afternoon. I want to get the house listing updated with the higher value estimate. This whole estate is worth way more than we initially thought." The casual way he said "we" made me sick. In his mind, he'd already erased me from the equation entirely. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Did Dad ever seem worried about money before he died? I mean, you spent more time with him those last few weeks than I realized." There was a pause. "What makes you ask that?" "I was going through some of his old papers, and I found some bank statements that looked like he might have been concerned about unauthorized charges or something." The pause grew longer. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was tighter, more controlled. "Dad was getting old, Becca. Sometimes elderly people get paranoid about their finances, see problems that aren't really there. I wouldn't read too much into old bank statements." "You're probably right. I just thought it was strange. Look, I'll be back tomorrow, and we can go through everything together, sort out any confusion about Dad's financial records. Okay?" After he hung up, I sat staring at my phone. Marcus was definitely worried about what I might have found, but he was trying to play it cool. That made him even more dangerous. Friday afternoon arrived with typical Phoenix heat, 110 degrees and blazing sunshine. I was sitting in Detective Martinez's car outside Marcus's hotel when his taxi pulled up. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man who'd successfully pulled off the crime of the century. He never saw it coming. "Marcus Patterson?" Martinez approached him as he paid the cab driver. "Yes?" "Detective Martinez, Phoenix Police. You're under arrest for theft, fraud, and forgery." She began reading him his rights as two other officers moved in to assist. The look on Marcus's face was priceless. Shock, confusion, and then growing anger as he realized what was happening. "This is insane," he shouted as they put handcuffs on him. "I haven't done anything wrong. This is some kind of mistake." His eyes found me standing near the detective's car, and his expression shifted to pure hatred. "You," he snarled. "This is your doing, isn't it? You can't stand that Dad loved me more, so you're making up lies." "Actually, Marcus," I said, stepping forward, "Dad loved you so much that he recorded your confession to stealing from him. Would you like to hear it again?" The color drained from his face as the reality of his situation hit home. 2 hours later, I was sitting across from him in an interrogation room, Detective Martinez beside me. Marcus had waived his right to an attorney, apparently believing he could talk his way out of trouble. He was wrong. "The evidence is overwhelming, Marcus." Martinez laid out photos of the bank records, copies of both wills and transcripts from the recording. "Theft, document forgery, fraud, we have you on all of it." "I want to make a deal," Marcus said quietly. "What kind of deal?" "I'll tell you everything. How I did it, why I did it, all of it. But I want reduced charges." Martinez looked at me, then back at Marcus. "That depends on what everything includes. Start talking." What followed was a confession that revealed the depths of Marcus's deception and desperation. He'd lost over $100,000 in cryptocurrency investments and high-risk startup funding. His Seattle job was in jeopardy because he'd been borrowing against his company's stock to cover his debts. "I wasn't trying to hurt Dad," he insisted. "I just needed time to recover my losses. I was going to pay him back everything with interest." "By forging his will?" I asked. Marcus looked at me with something that might have been shame. "I panicked after he confronted me. I knew he was going to cut me out of the inheritance entirely. I had a friend in Seattle who works in legal document preparation. He helped me create a new will that looked authentic." "What about Dad's death, Marcus? The timing seems very convenient." His face went pale again. "Are you suggesting I killed him? That's insane. Dad had a heart attack. I had nothing to do with that." But Detective Martinez wasn't finished. "Tell us about the argument you had with him 2 days before he died." "How do you know about that?" "Your father documented everything, Marcus. He was preparing a case against you." The fight seemed to go out of Marcus then. He slumped in his chair, looking older and more defeated than I'd ever seen him. "We had a terrible fight," he admitted. "Dad was threatening to report me to the police, to cut me out of the will entirely. He said I was a disappointment to the family name. I got angry and said some things I didn't mean." "What kind of things?" "I told him he was a selfish old man who was holding me back, that I'd be better off without him." Marcus looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "I didn't mean it, Becca. I was just angry and scared. When he died 2 days later, I thought maybe the stress of our fight contributed to his heart attack." The confession lasted 3 more hours, with Marcus detailing how he'd switched the wills, coached the witnesses, and manipulated the entire probate process. By the end, even Detective Martinez looked disturbed by the scope of the deception. "One more question," I said, as they prepared to take Marcus back to his cell. "If you'd gotten away with this, what would you have done? Sold everything and disappeared?" Marcus looked at me with something that might have been regret. "I would have split the money with you eventually. Maybe not 50-50, but I wouldn't have left you with nothing. You're still my sister." It was probably another lie, but there was something in his voice that made me think he might actually believe it. Either way, it was too little, too late. Marcus's confession made headlines in the Phoenix area. Tech executive arrested for forging father's will. But the real victory came 3 weeks later when the probate court officially recognized the legitimate will from Johnson & Associates. Standing in Judge Catherine Morrison's courtroom, I felt Dad's presence more strongly than ever as she read the corrected inheritance details. The house, the business, and all assets would be split equally between Marcus and me, just as Dad had wanted. The judge also noted that given Marcus's criminal conviction, his portion of the inheritance would be held in trust pending resolution of restitution claims. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, this court finds that the deceased, Robert Patterson, was a victim of elder financial abuse, and his estate is entitled to full recovery of all stolen funds with interest and penalties. The total came to $23,000, the money Marcus had stolen, plus interest and legal fees. It would be recovered from his portion of the inheritance before he could access any of it. But the courtroom drama was just the beginning. Detective Martinez had continued investigating the circumstances around Dad's death, and what she discovered added another layer to Marcus's crimes. "We found something in your father's medical records," she told me after the hearing. "His doctor noted that he'd been experiencing unusual stress and anxiety in the weeks before his death. The physician actually recommended counseling because your father was so worried about family financial issues. The doctor, Dr. Amanda Chen, had treated Dad for 20 years. She agreed to meet with me to discuss his final weeks." "Your father was genuinely distressed," Dr. Chen explained as we sat in her office. "He came in complaining of chest pains and difficulty sleeping. When I asked about stress factors, he broke down and told me about discovering the theft. He felt betrayed not just financially but emotionally." "Did the stress contribute to his heart attack?" Dr. Chen chose her words carefully. "Emotional stress can absolutely trigger cardiac events in people with underlying heart disease. Your father had mild coronary artery disease, manageable with medication and lifestyle changes. But severe emotional trauma can be the precipitating factor that turns a manageable condition into a fatal event." The medical examiner agreed to amend Dad's death certificate to include acute emotional distress due to financial elder abuse as a contributing factor. It wasn't murder, but it meant Marcus's actions had directly contributed to Dad's death. This revelation hit Marcus hard when Detective Martinez delivered the news during a follow-up interview. I watched through the two-way mirror as my brother learned that his theft had literally broken our father's heart. "I never wanted to hurt him," Marcus sobbed, his composure finally cracking completely. "I just needed the money. I thought I could fix everything before he found out." "But he did find out," Martinez said quietly, "and it killed him." The weight of that realization seemed to crush Marcus. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt something approaching pity for my brother. He'd destroyed his relationship with Dad, lost his inheritance, faced years in prison, and now had to live with the knowledge that his actions contributed to our father's death. 2 months later, Marcus was sentenced to 5 years in prison for theft, fraud, and forgery. The judge was particularly harsh because of the elder abuse component and the sophisticated nature of the will fraud. This court sees cases of family members taking advantage of elderly relatives far too often, Judge Morrison said during sentencing. But rarely do we see such calculated, prolonged deception combined with such callous disregard for the victim's well-being. Mr. Patterson, your actions didn't just steal money. They stole your father's peace of mind in his final days. I attended the sentencing but didn't speak. Marcus looked back at me once as they led him away, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Genuine remorse. Whether it was for what he'd done to Dad or simply for getting caught, I couldn't tell. After the trial, I threw myself into restoring Dad's business. Desert artisan furniture had been his passion, and I wanted to honor his memory by keeping it alive. Many of his old customers reached out when they heard what had happened, offering support and new orders. Mrs. Henderson, who'd commissioned a dining room set from Dad just before he died, became my first major client. Your father was so excited about this project, she told me as we discussed the details. He said he was looking forward to teaching you some of his advanced techniques, said you had real talent for the craft. Working in Dad's shop, using his tools, following his detailed project notes, I felt connected to him in a way I never had before. Each piece of furniture I completed was both a tribute to his memory and a step toward healing. But the business discovery that shocked me most came when I was organizing Dad's client files. Hidden in the back of his project notebook was a letter addressed to me, dated just 1 week before his death. "My dear Rebekah," it began, "if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and I hope it means you've also discovered the truth about Marcus's actions. I want you to know that my decision to change the will wasn't made in anger, but in love. Love for both of you, even though Marcus has lost his way." The letter went on to explain Dad's hopes that Marcus would eventually get help for what he called his money sickness, and find his way back to being the son Dad remembered from childhood. "But regardless of what happens with Marcus," the letter continued, "I want you to know how proud I am of the woman you've become. Your loyalty, your integrity, your willingness to stay close to home and help with the business, these qualities matter more than any amount of money. The real inheritance I'm leaving you isn't financial. It's the knowledge that you are exactly the kind of person this world needs more of." Reading those words in Dad's careful handwriting, sitting in the workshop where he'd spent countless hours creating beautiful things with his hands, I finally understood what justice really meant. It wasn't just about punishing Marcus or recovering stolen money. It was about ensuring that Dad's values, honesty, hard work, love of family, continued to live on. The workshop became my sanctuary, the place where I could feel Dad's guidance as I learned to use tools I'd only watched him handle before. Some days were harder than others, especially when I found projects he'd started but never finished, or when customers shared memories of his kindness and craftsmanship. 6 months after Marcus's sentencing, I received an unexpected letter from him in prison. In it, he apologized for everything: the theft, the forged will, the years of taking Dad's love for granted. He asked if I would visit him, said he wanted to make amends somehow. I thought about it for weeks before deciding. When I finally drove to the state prison in Florence, I wasn't sure what I wanted to say or what I hoped to accomplish. Marcus looked older, thinner, worn down by his months in prison, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been in years, as if losing everything had somehow brought him back to himself. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said as we sat across from each other in the visiting room. "I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I did. Not just the legal stuff, but what I did to Dad, what I did to our family." "What do you understand, Marcus?" that I was so focused on money and success that I forgot what actually mattered. Dad didn't care about my tech job or my apartment in Seattle. He just wanted to spend time with his son, and instead of giving him that, I stole from him. We talked for 2 hours, the longest real conversation we'd had in years. Marcus told me about the therapy he was receiving in prison, about coming to terms with what he called his addiction to financial success. He seemed genuinely changed, though I knew it would take years to know if the change was real. Before I left, he asked me one question that stayed with me for weeks afterward. "Rebekah, do you think Dad would have forgiven me if he'd lived long enough?" I thought about the letter Dad had left, about his hopes for Marcus's redemption, about the man who had taught me that family love doesn't have conditions. "Yes," I told my brother, "I think he would have. The question is whether you can forgive yourself." A year and a half after Dad's death, Desert Artisan Furniture was thriving again. I'd completed the dining room set for Mrs. Henderson, restored an antique armoire for the Phoenix Art Museum, and even taken on an apprentice, a young woman named Casey, who reminded me of myself at 25, eager to learn traditional woodworking in a digital world. The business success felt good, but it wasn't the most important thing that had changed in my life. Working with Dad's tools every day, following his techniques, continuing his relationships with longtime customers, I discovered something I never expected. I was good at this. Not just competent, but genuinely talented. Dad had been right about my potential. More importantly, I'd found peace with what had happened. The anger and betrayal I'd felt toward Marcus had evolved into something more complex. Sadness for what we'd lost as a family, but also hope that healing was possible. That hope was tested when I received a call from Marcus's prison counselor, Dr. Patricia Reeves. "Your brother has been participating in our family reconciliation program," she explained. "Part of his rehabilitation involves making direct amends to people he's harmed. He's asked if you'd be willing to participate in a mediated conversation." "What would that involve?" "It's a structured dialogue where Marcus can express his remorse and take responsibility for his actions, and you can share how those actions affected you. The goal isn't necessarily forgiveness, but understanding and closure." I agreed to the session, more for my own peace of mind than for Marcus's benefit. 2 weeks later, I found myself back at the state prison, this time in a small counseling room with Dr. Reeves facilitating. Marcus looked different again, healthier, more centered. Prison had been difficult for him, but it seemed to have forced a kind of growth that perhaps nothing else could have achieved. "Rebekah," he began, his voice steady but emotional, "I want to start by acknowledging the full scope of what I did to you and to Dad. I didn't just steal money or forge documents. I stole your security, your trust in family, your peace of mind during Dad's final days. I made you question everything you believed about our relationship." Dr. Reeves nodded encouragingly. "Can you be specific about how your actions affected your father?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I turned Dad's last months into a nightmare. Instead of enjoying his retirement and spending time with his children, he was stressed and heartbroken because he'd discovered that his own son was stealing from him. I took away his ability to trust me, and I probably contributed to the heart attack that killed him." It was hard to hear, but it was also exactly what I needed to hear. Full accountability without excuses or justifications. "Marcus," I said, when Dr. Reeves asked for my response, "the hardest part for me wasn't even the money or the house. It was realizing that you saw Dad as nothing more than a bank account, that you were so focused on his death and what you'd inherit that you couldn't appreciate him while he was alive." "You're right," Marcus replied. "I was so worried about my financial problems that I couldn't see past them to what really mattered. Dad just wanted to have a relationship with me, and I threw that away for money that wasn't even mine." The conversation continued for 2 hours, covering everything from our childhood relationship to the specific events leading up to Dad's death. By the end, something had shifted between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. I could see that Marcus truly grasped the magnitude of what he'd lost, and he could see how his actions had devastated not just Dad, but me as well. "There's something else," Marcus said as our session was ending. "I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to find a way to honor Dad's memory. I've been thinking about it for months." "What do you mean?" "Dad's workshop. His tools, his techniques, everything he taught you, that's his real legacy. When I get out of prison, I want to help you expand the business. Not as a partner," he added quickly, "but as someone who can handle the business side while you focus on the craftsmanship. I want to help make desert artisan furniture something Dad would be proud of." I wasn't ready to commit to anything like that, but I could see the sincerity in his offer. "We'll see, Marcus. You still have 3.5 years left in your sentence. A lot can change in that time." "I know. I just wanted you to know that I'm thinking about ways to make amends that go beyond just saying sorry." Driving home from the prison, I thought about redemption and second chances. Dad had believed in both concepts deeply. He'd taught me that people could change if they truly wanted to, that mistakes didn't have to define someone forever. But I also thought about consequences and accountability. Marcus had committed serious crimes that had devastated our family. Even if he was genuinely changed, that didn't erase what he'd done or entitle him to automatic forgiveness. That evening, I called Emma to talk through my feelings about the prison visit. "It sounds like he's doing the work," she said after I described the session. "But you're right to be cautious. Real change takes time to prove itself." The weird thing is, I think I want to believe he can change. Not for his sake, but for Dad's. Dad always hoped Marcus would find his way back to being the person he used to be. "What does your gut tell you?" I thought about that question for a long time. My gut tells me that the brother I grew up with is still in there somewhere, but it also tells me that trust, once broken this completely, takes years to rebuild. 6 months later, I made a decision that surprised even me. I started visiting Marcus regularly, not for emotional reconciliation, but for practical planning. If he was serious about making amends through work, then he needed to understand what Dad's business had meant to our community. I brought photos of completed projects, customer testimonials, stories about how Dad's furniture had become family heirlooms passed down through generations. I wanted Marcus to understand that desert artisan furniture wasn't just a business. It was Dad's way of creating beauty and permanence in other people's lives. Marcus listened to these stories with growing amazement. "I never really understood what Dad did," he admitted during one visit. "I always thought it was just making furniture. I didn't realize he was creating things that would outlast him, that would be treasured by families for generations." That's exactly what he was doing, and it's what I'm trying to continue. "Rebekah, I have a confession to make. I never really appreciated Dad's work because I was embarrassed by it. My friends in Seattle all had parents who were doctors or tech executives or investment bankers. I thought Dad was just a guy with a workshop. And now? Now, I think he was an artist, and I think what you're doing to honor his memory is the most important work either of us could do." By the time Marcus had served 2 years of his sentence, our relationship had evolved into something neither of us had expected. We weren't close the way we'd been as children, and I still didn't fully trust him. But we'd developed a mutual respect and a shared commitment to preserving Dad's legacy. When the parole board granted Marcus early release for good behavior and successful completion of rehabilitation programs, I felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The theoretical conversations about redemption and second chances were about to become reality. The day Marcus was released, I picked him up from the prison. He looked nervous, older, but somehow more solid than he'd been before his conviction. As we drove toward Phoenix, he was quiet for a long time before finally speaking. "I know this is going to take time, Becca. Building back any kind of relationship, proving that I've really changed. I'm not expecting anything except the chance to show you through my actions that I'm not the same person who stole from Dad." "I know," I replied, "and I'm willing to give you that chance. But Marcus, if you ever lie to me again, if you ever put financial gain ahead of family again, we're done. Permanently." "I understand. and I accept those terms. As we pulled into the parking lot of a halfway house where Marcus would live for the next 6 months, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Cautious optimism about my brother's future. Whether that optimism was justified remained to be seen. 2 years have passed since Marcus was released from prison, and I'm writing this from Dad's old workshop, now expanded and modernized, but still filled with the spirit of craftsmanship he loved. Desert Artisan Furniture has grown beyond anything I could have imagined, with a 6-month waiting list for custom pieces and recognition from Arizona Home and Garden magazine as Master Craftsman of the Year. Marcus kept his word about making amends through action rather than just words. He spent his first year out of prison working construction jobs and living in a studio apartment, carefully rebuilding his life without any financial help from the family inheritance. He completed his business degree through a prison education program and gradually took over the administrative side of Desert Artisan Furniture: bookkeeping, customer relations, project scheduling. It wasn't easy learning to work together again. There were arguments, moments of tension when old patterns of behavior threatened to resurface. But Marcus seemed genuinely committed to earning back my trust through consistency and transparency. He insisted on a formal business agreement that gave him a small salary but no ownership stake in the company, and he opened all his financial records to my review. The real test came last spring when a luxury hotel chain offered to buy Desert Artisan Furniture for a substantial sum, with the plan to mass-produce Dad's designs overseas. The old Marcus would have pushed for the sale, focused solely on the financial gain, but this Marcus advocated for declining the offer. Dad's work was about quality and permanence. He argued during our discussion. Mass production would destroy everything that made his furniture special. We'd be trading his legacy for money, and we've already seen where that leads. I turned down the offer, and Marcus never questioned the decision. Our relationship today is complicated but genuine. We're not as close as we were in childhood. Too much has happened for that kind of innocence to return. But we've built something new. A partnership based on shared commitment to honoring Dad's memory and mutual accountability. Marcus has been dating a woman named Jennifer for 8 months now, someone he met in a financial literacy class he teaches at the community center. She knows his full history, and her acceptance of his past while holding him accountable for his present seems to be exactly what he needs. The inheritance situation was finally resolved last year. After restitution, legal fees, and Marcus's prison-related expenses, his share came to about 60% of the original amount. He used most of it to pay down debts and establish a small emergency fund, keeping his lifestyle deliberately modest. My share allowed me to expand the workshop, invest in better equipment, and hire 2 additional craftspeople. More importantly, it gave me the financial security to honor Dad's tradition of taking on pro bono projects for families who couldn't afford custom furniture but truly needed it. But the most meaningful inheritance wasn't financial. Dad's real gift to me was the knowledge that his values, integrity, craftsmanship, love of family, could survive even the worst betrayal and emerge stronger. I think about Dad every day as I work with his tools, follow his techniques, and continue relationships with customers who've become like extended family. The recording he made of Marcus's confession, which initially seemed like evidence of our family's destruction, has become something else entirely. Proof that even in his final days, Dad was still trying to protect both his children and preserve the possibility of redemption. The workshop has become a place of healing as well as creation. Marcus and I talk there regularly, sometimes about business, sometimes about Dad, sometimes about the long journey back from betrayal to trust. It's where Marcus finally broke down and cried for Dad, really grieved him, 2 years after his death. "I missed my chance to know him as an adult," Marcus said that day. "I was so focused on proving I was successful that I never just sat with him and learned from him." "It's not too late to learn from him," I replied. "His example is all around us." Would I do anything differently if I could go back to that day in the lawyer's office when I first heard the fake will? Probably not. The investigation, the confrontation, the pursuit of justice, all of it was necessary not just for legal resolution, but for our family's healing. Sometimes the only way through betrayal is straight through it, facing the truth no matter how painful. Marcus will always carry the weight of what he did to Dad. That's appropriate. Some actions should have permanent consequences, but he's also shown that it's possible to build a meaningful life while carrying that weight, to find purpose in making amends rather than just seeking forgiveness. As for me, I've learned that inheritance isn't just about money or property. The real inheritance Dad left me was the strength to fight for truth, the skill to create beautiful things with my hands, and the wisdom to know that justice and mercy don't have to be mutually exclusive. Desert Artisan Furniture continues to grow, but it will always remain a family business in the truest sense, a place where Dad's values live on through every piece we create, every customer relationship we build, and every day we choose integrity over easy profit.